One of the very few humans on my most influential humans list that is still alive till this present day, Mikhail Gorbachev. A man with quite an interesting history, currently 90 years plus, and still actively involved in the international scene till today. Who is he and what made him influential? Well, you are definitely about to find out. What's up, amazing and beautiful people of this weird planet called Earth? Welcome to the 29th and first 2022 episode of History's Most Influential Humans podcast. It's been a while. So before you listen to this brief episode, which wasn't later brief at the end of the day, it is worthwhile to listen to the 11th episode of History's Most Influential Humans podcast, if you haven't listened to it, where I summarize the life of the influential human, Vladimir Lenin, who was the founder of the Communist Soviet Union of Russia. Because today's influential human is sort of like the end of the line for the Soviet Union that Vladimir Lenin had begun. Reading about today's influential human really took a lot of my attention because I learned a lot about how the lack of knowledge of even the least nearest future is a big determinant of why we should be careful of the actions we take in any present, and so much more. Well, not to dabble into too much talk, let's dive right into today's influential human. Born on March 2, 1931, in Privolnoye, Stavropol, Mikhail Gorbachev was given birth into a poor peasant family of Russian and Ukrainian heritage. In his youth, he operated combined harvester with his father while still in school. On one occasion in 1948, he and his father harvested over 8,000 centenars of grains, which made his father bag the award of Order of Lenin and him the award of Order of the Red Banner of Labour. In 1946, he had joined Komsomol, the Soviet political youth organization, and became the leader of his local group, and then being elected to the Komsomol committee for the district. After his high school at age 19, he pursued a degree in law from the prestigious Moscow State University, which accepted him without an exam, most likely because of the award he had collected while he was still in high school. He received his law degree in 1955 with a distinction just after he had married the love of his life, Raisa Tatarenko, in 1953, who was studying philosophy in the same school. Gorbachev subsequently moved to Stavropol with his wife, where they lived in one room. At this time, he was working for the Komsomol Youth Organization. After Stalin's death, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, launched an oppositional change from the Soviet government of Stalin. This decision of change was also a big part of Gorbachev's mindset since the time he was still very young in the Russian political ladder. In September 1956, he was made first secretary of the Stavropol city's Komsomol, placing him in charge of it, and from here on out, he just continued to rise in political positions through showing competence, extreme hard work, continuous learning, and loyalism to people and to the reformation of his country, patriotism, despite opposition and envy of his rapid growth. In April 1958, he was made deputy head of the Komsomol for the entire region, which gifted him a change of apartment into a 2-room flat with its own private kitchen, toilet, and bedroom. But at this point, he already had a daughter named Irina. In March 1961, Gorbachev became first secretary of the regional Komsomol and continued to be politically efficient and reliable, as he was making so many amazing changes in youth and women involvement in the society and laudable agricultural achievements. In January 1963, he was promoted to personnel chief for the regional party's agricultural committee, and in September 1966, he became first secretary of the Stavropol City Party organization. Although in 1968, frustration from stagnation of reforms of the Nikita Khrushchev era made Gorbachev think of retiring from politics to go into academia. But this didn't come to fruition, as he was given another responsibility in August 1968 to become the second secretary of the Stavropol Krakow, making him the deputy of the first secretary, Leonid Yefremov, and the second most senior figure in the Stavropol region. At age 39, he became the first secretary after Yefremov was promoted to a higher position, so he had significant power over the Stavropol region. At this point, Gorbachev had come to the conclusion that economic and other national failures were caused by an excessive centralization of decision-making in Moscow, which he felt was a big flaw in the communist Soviet Union and needed to be reformed to propagate an economic breakthrough in a time that Russia was becoming less of a world power and the US was rising in power. But Gorbachev could not do too much yet because his position wasn't significant enough to make those kind of big reforms. In November 1978, Gorbachev was appointed as Secretary of the Central Committee and finally moved away from Stavropol to Moscow with his family, where they were eventually given a more comfortable accommodation with cooks, bodyguards, servants, and so on. At this time, he spent less hours with his family and more working. In 1984, after the then Secretary General of the Communists, Andropov, died, he indicated that Gorbachev succeeded him, but many in the Central Committee said that the 53-year-old Gorbachev was too young and inexperienced, and so an older man with poor health, Konstantin Chernenko, became the General Secretary. But that didn't last too long, as this man died on 10th March 1985, and the Central Committee didn't have a choice than to make the most reliable man for the job, Mikhail Gorbachev, the 8th ruler of the Soviet Union. But I'm sure they had no idea it was going to be the last. In less than a year, Gorbachev had started radical reforms, first replacing influential positions with his allies and convincing old Soviet leaders to retire and also replacing them with his allies, because he knew they could remove him from power when he began to make significant reforms in the Soviet structure. He termed his reformation perestroika, encompassing a complex series of reforms to restructure society and the economy. Well, to cut this story short, his post-Soviet leadership era were full of varying challenges, adoption of different optimistic policies, and subsequent reversals. His massive intentions of economic reforms isn't really one that he was widely recognized and celebrated for, but he was celebrated globally for ending the Cold War, which he won a Nobel Peace Prize for, consistently going against the use of nuclear weapons, which obviously hasn't affected in modern day, the stop of totalitarian Soviet government and introduction of democracy, which he was quite blamed for doing in Eastern Europe, and so much more. In August 1991, a group of senior Communist Party figures launched a coup d'etat to seize control of the Soviet Union, which at the end of the day wasn't successful. But this would be the beginning of the final fall of the Soviet Union. 2 days later, Gorbachev resigned as the General Secretary. On 8 December 1991, the Belavezha Accords was signed, which declared the Soviet Union had ceased to exist and formed the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, as its successor, although this was done without Gorbachev's knowledge, and he got really furious when he found out, but it was too late. The Soviet Union was no more. Although he didn't acknowledge the new CIS government, now, after so many events has occurred, he focuses on his Gorbachev's Foundation, which also tasks itself with the monitoring and critiquing of life in post-Soviet Russia. So many little details and other interesting information weren't mentioned in the summary of this influential human, just so it doesn't get excessively long and boring. But I'm sure you'd have learnt a lot so far from this influential human. But if you're a big fan of learning a lot more, like me, then I'd suggest you check out YouTube videos on this influential human. It is definitely worth checking out. On this note, I bid thou farewell. See you all on the next episode of HMIH, and don't forget to follow me on IG and Twitter at Damilare_Mapa, and your feedbacks would really be appreciated. Peace.